This is a special presentation brought to you by the Daf Map, based on one of the lectures given by HaRav Yehonasan Berger Shlita. Please check out our other videos and shiurim at www.thedafmap.com.
Today's shiur, Maseches Sanhedrin, Daf Gimel. In our previous shiur, the Gemara discussed how are we to understand the opening of the Mishnah. The Mishnah that said, Dine mominus b'shlosha, Gezelos v'chavolos b'shlosha. The question was raised, there seems to be a redundancy. Namely, Gezelos v'chavolos, theft and battery, are themselves a form of Dine mominus. So why was it necessary to spell things out as it did? We saw Rabbi Avo, who explained that the Mishnah was in a mahain form. Namely, it taught Dine mominus and then specified which Dine mominus are we discussing. And we said we're coming to exclude dinim of hoidos valvos, admissions of financial debt, and halvos, loans. We're excluding them from the necessity of having mumchen, experts, to judge. However, we're not excluding them from the number 3. So, in a manner of speaking, you could say there are two categories. There's the category of hoidos and avos, which are judged by 3, but 3 commoners, versus the case of gezelos v'chavolos, which are judged by 3, but they must be mumchen, experts. How did Rabbi Avo set up the Mishnah? He said that the Mishnah is taught in an exclusionary fashion, namely that dine mominus that we're discussing concerns only gezelos v'chavolos. The Gemara asks now, on the 5th line from the top of Gimel Amud Aleph in Sanhedrin, if everything we said is the case, that hoidos and avos needs 3, tarti kotoni, there are really 2 categories. And as Rashi explains here, why did the Mishnah have to be explained as he did in the mahain fashion, namely in the exclusionary fashion? You could have explained the Mishnah as follows. And this ihachi question is a question that we call a long question. As you can see, there's a circled kuf to the immediate left-hand side of the Gemara text with a vertical dashed line indicating the length of this question. The question is, why did he set up the Mishnah as an exclusionary statement? Rather, you could have taught as follows. Aleph, dine mominus b'shlosha hedyotos. That dine mominus are judged by 3 commoners. And those dine mominos would be the hoidos and avos. Beis, a second category, gezelos v'chavolos, theft and battery, b'shlosha mumchen. Notice how we've also underlined the expressions hedyotos and mumchen being the emphasis on the 2 different types of categories. The oid, and furthermore, if it's so that chado kotoni, as Rabbi Avo said, that there's only 1 category being taught in the Mishnah, then shloisha lomali, why did the term or the word shlosha appear twice? The Rashi explains, if it were as Rabbi Avo said, that chado kotoni, it should have said as follows, dine momenos shehein gezelos v'chavolos bishlosha. But it doesn't say that. It uses the word shlosha twice in the opening line. As a result of these 2 questions on Rabbi Avo's approach, this brings the second approach to explaining the Mishnah, and that of Rava. Elo amar Rava. Tarti kotoni mishum de Rabbi Chanina. In fact, the Mishnah is not exclusionary, but rather there are 2 separate categories. There's the category of commoners judging halvos, and the reason for commoners dealing with halvos is based on Rabbi Chanina's teaching, namely that min haTorah you really did require experts for halvos cases. And Rashi explains this is a function of Eruv Parshios Kosuvkan, that the Parsha of Halvos, of loans, is included in the Parsha of Shomrim, which means that we should have experts. However, we relieve the need for having experts because of the Rabbi Chanino consideration that was mentioned in the previous shiur, that if you insisted on having experts for cases of loans, people would not want to loan money. The second category that Rava referred to, Tarti Kotoni, the second category being Gezelos v'chavolos. There we go with the Torah standard of needing 3 experts. Before we go further in the Gemara, we must take note of another marking. We see a little aleph in a triangle and a beis on the in triangles. This is explained in our structural note that you see in the margin, the Mivneh. You see a triangle featured, Shnei Mishuloshim, aleph and beis. Kedei la'akoiv. These are employed here in order to follow Acharei Machloikis Rava v'Rabbi Acha. We will see a machlokis between Rava and Rav Acha. B'mispar hadayonim ladinei halvois midaoiraisa. How many judges are needed for halvoos cases from a Torah perspective? In other words, Rava and Rav Acha, that we are going to see very shortly, do not argue as far as bottom line is concerned. You do need 3. The question is, from the Torah standpoint, from the Torah perspective, how many do you need? And so we've indicated here in our note, Aleph, L'Rava Gimel De'iraisa. You need 3 from a Torah level, Mishum De'eruv Parshias Kosev Kan, because of what we mentioned, that the topic of loans is included in the Parsha of Shomrim, where 3 are alluded to, 3 judges are alluded to in the Parsha of Shomrim. So if you say Eruv Parshias Kosev Kan, that means that in the same Parsha of Shomrim we're also discussing Halvois. Beis, L'Rav Acha, Midoraisa Sagi B'chad. According to Rav Acha, 1 is sufficient from a Torah perspective. Why? The Ein Eruv Parshias Kosev Kan. Because we don't have this Parsha inserted here, namely the Parsha of Havos, of loans, is not inserted in or mixed into the Parsha of Shomrim. For Rak Midrabbanon Ba'inon Shlosha, and only from a rabbinic standpoint is there a requirement of having 3. Let's continue in the Gemara. Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika Omar Midoraisa, from a Torah standpoint, Chad Nami Kosher Shenemar B'Tzedek Tishpoit Amisecha. This pasuk says that with justice one should judge his fellow man. And how do I see 1 in the pasuk? Because the word tishpot is in the singular. If that be the case, then why is it that on a practical level even Rav Acha agrees you need to have 3? Elo mishum yoshvei kronos. So as to deal with the issue of yoshvei kronos, people that are non-expert in law. The Rashi says that toward the end of the narrow lines, Gezerah mishum yoshvei kronos, we require 3 so as to get around this problem. Tagorin, these are merchants, she'ein b'kiyim b'tiv dinim, they're not familiar with the nature of law. V'yazak es achai, v'chai es azak, and they'll mess up. They'll exonerate the guilty and condemn the innocent. So what do? We require to have 3. We don't want to have a singular person judging, because we might encounter a Yoshev Kronos as serving as judge. The Gemara asks, Otu betlosa milo havu Yoshvei Kronos, and if you have 3, are you not going to have the same problem of having 3 ignorant individuals? So the Gemara answers that with a statistical reply. If you have 3 people there, it's impossible that amongst 3 people, 1 would not be knowledgeable. The Gomir, Rashi says, the Gomir sheshoma mechachomim umidayonim hilchus din milveh. Someone who at least heard from rabbis and from judges laws regarding havol. So if you have 3 people there, statistically, you're going to guarantee yourself of having at least 1 that is familiar with halachas. Elo me'ata to'o lo yishalmu. But now that you say that 3 commoners do serve as judges, if they make a mistake, since they have rishus to judge, they have permission to judge, lo yishalmu, they should not be obligated to compensate for their error. So the Gemara answers, if you relieve them of need for compensating, kol shekain denafishi yoshvei kronos, we're only going to encourage the phenomenon of ignorance all the more. People will feel, oh, I can serve as a judge, I don't really have to be knowledgeable, and if I make a mistake, I won't have to pay. So up to this point in our discussion, we've seen Rava, who's featured in a diamond, compared or contrasted with Rabbi Avo. They were both addressing the issue of how to understand the opening line of the Mishnah. We've also, with our markings, contrasted Rava with Rav Acha. That was with the Aleph and Beis that we have in triangles. They agree that you need to have 3 people judging cases of halvos. The question is, the number 3, is that a Torah-based number? Or is it a rabbinic-based number? According to Rava, we said it's a Torah-based number, that you have to have 3, and not only do you have to have 3, but you have to have 3 experts, and we relieved the need for experts from a takonas Rabbon Chachomim based on Rabbi Chanina's teaching. Rav Acha, on the other hand, says from a Torah perspective, all you need is 1, and there's no reference to experts whatsoever because Ein Eruv Parshias Kosav Kan. So according to Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Acha, we elevate the number, we increase the number from 1 to 3 from a rabbinic perspective. The Gemara now asks, "My iko bein Rava l'Rav Acha brei Rav Ika." What difference is there between Rava, who says you need 3 from a Torah perspective, and Shitas Rav Acha that says from the Torah 1 is enough? Iko binayo. The difference between them will be Shmuel's teaching. The Omar Shmuel, Shnayim Shedanu, 2 who judge a case, dinehem din, their conclusion is binding, elo shenikro'u beis din chotzuf, but they are called a chutzpah beis din, a chutzpah beis din. What's the chutzpah? The chutzpah meaning that they violated the takonas chachomim. Namely, according to Shmuel, the Torah does not require 3. Less than 3 would be enough. But the Rabbanon, the chachomim require 3. Hence, if you have less than 3, we, according to Shmuel, will call them a beis din chotzuf. The Gemara now points out the difference between Rava and Rav Acha. Notice we've used the Aleph and Beis in triangles again to tie this up with the Gemara, to connect it with the Gemara above. Le Rava, less lay de Shmuel. According to Rava, that the number 3 is required from the Torah, less than 3 will have no validity. And hence he doesn't hold from Shmuel's teaching that said dinehem din, that the conclusion of 2 is binding. L'Rav Acha brei Rav Ika islay de Shmuel. According to Rav Acha, that from the Torah standpoint, you don't have to have 3. So he islay de Shmuel. He holds from Shmuel that the conclusion of less than 3 has validity. Only that it's called a beis din chotzuf. As we go on in the Gemara, we are continuing with the next section of the Mishnah. Nezek v'chatzi nezek. Let us glance at the outside margin to our topic heading. Nosay, Loma Katani Nezek v'chatzi nezek. Why does the Mishnah teach that you need to have 3 judges for cases of nezek, of damage, and the chatzi nezek, payment in the case of the short tam? Achrei shekvar katani chavolos. After the Mishnah already used the term chavolos, battery. In the case of chavola, of battery, nezek, payment is made. Payment for damages is already included in chavolos. The Gemara continues now inside. Nezek, hainu chavolos. Nezek is already included in chavolos. In fact, nezek is one of the 5 payments that are made by a person that beats his friend. When a human being hits and causes damage to the fellow human being, there are a series of 5 different payments, which we will not detail right now, but one of those 5 payments is called nezek. So once you teach me that chavolos is judged by 3, that includes the nezek. The Gemara answers, Mishum de kaboi lemisna chatzi nezek, tona nami nezek sholem. Since the Mishnah had an agenda of its own, namely it wanted to teach that chatzi nezek is judged by 3, so it also teaches nezek, the full nezek payment, nezek sholem. The Gemara asks, chatzi nezek nami, hainu chavolos, but the issue of chatzi nezek is also a form of chavola. That's a case of battery performed by a shor tam. The the non-malicious animal who gores pays a half nezek, half damage payment. But that's also considered chavala. So why does chatzi nezek have to be taught independently? The Gemara answers, Tana mamoina v'katani knasa. The Mishnah, by teaching nezek shalem or chavalos, that's called a mamon payment, a direct financial payment. Chatzi nezek, on the other hand, is not categorized as standard financial payment or obligation, but rather a fine, a knas payment. As a result of that, we would not be able to say that chatzi nezek is included in chavalos or nezek shalem. The Gemara says this analysis is true, but not according to all opinions. This is true according to the opinion that holds that chatzi nezek, palgan is chatzi nezek, is a knas payment. That being on the following idea that's shared by Rashi, that your standard shiur, your standard ox, according to this opinion, is a docile animal, that stam shvorim are called non-nagchonim, and as such, if we view them as docile and it acts in an unusual way, in an unanticipated way, so we go easy on the owner for the first 3 times and say, pay only half. The fact that we insist on his paying anything is itself of a novel idea, and hence we categorize that as a knas payment and non-momo payment. The Gemara goes on, but according to the opinion that views your standard shiur as malicious, hence his damaging, his act of aggression would be viewed as anticipated, and hence the resultant financial debt as a result of the damage could be categorized as standard mamon, my iko the meimar. The Gemara. So why is it taught separately? Once you teach me chavalos, that includes nezek and the chatzi nezek. The chatzi nezek payment being made for momo payment according to this particular opinion. Elo aidi de koboi lemisna tashlume kefil v'tashlume arbo v'chamisha de momon she'enoi mishtalein barosh. Since the Mishnah wanted to teach these additional types of payments of the double payment that is paid for in the case of a ganav, a stealthful thief, or the case of the theft of shor the tzon, the heavy cattle and the light cattle, sheep and oxen, where the payment of their stolen and slaughtered or stolen and sold is a 4 or 5 time payment. That's called mamon she'eno mishtalein barosh. Namely, it's an amount of money that does not correspond directly to the principal value. Double payment is, of course, not principal, it's principal plus 1, double. 4 or 5, obviously, much more. It's a payment that doesn't correspond to the principal. As a result of wanting to teach that, Tana Nami, the Gemara continues at the top of Gimel Amud Beis, the Mishnah also teaches Chatzi Nezek, de Mamon She'eno Mishtalein Berosh Hu. Chatzi Nezek also is a type of payment that does not correspond to principal. In this case, it's less than the principal. The Aidi de Koboi Lemisna Chatzi Nezek, and since the Mishnah wanted to teach the case of Chatzi Nezek, Tana Nami Nezek, it throws in the case of Nezek as well, even though one might have understood that anyway from the term Chavolois. Now the Gemara turns to the question of numbers. Shloisha minolan. From where do we know that 3 is the number required for judging? When we ask from where do we know, this certainly will correspond to the approach that says that 3 is a Torah requirement. The note that we have on the outside margin under the topic heading Nosay, Mokor le Gimel Dayonim. We will be seeking out a source for 3 judges. We will also be featuring in the Gemara the following. In our note we say, Machlokes Rav Yoshia v'Rav Yehonasan. There will be a controversy between these 2 Tanoim. Im lidrosh hapasuk v'nikrav bal habayis el hu Elohim leminyan. Do we use this pasuk as one of our sources for numbers? Lefi shitas Rav Yehonasan ein tzorech lidrosh hapasuk hanal l'shem minyan. According to Rav Yehonasan, we will see in the Gemara that there is no need to darshan that pasuk for number purposes. In other words, we will see the word Elohim appearing several times in Shmois Chof Beis, Psukim Zayin and Ches. In fact, we'll see it appearing 3 times. According to Rav Yehonasan, the first time it appears, and that is in this pasuk V'nikrav Balabayas, that does not serve as one of the 3 for the purpose of getting to the number 3. Demaspik b'shnei psukim. According to Rav Yehonasan, 2 verses will be enough. V'hadin she'omer detzorech bezdin noite hainu mispar zugi kegon sholosh. And the third judge will be a function of the din that says that you need to have an uneven number. As a result of saying that you need an uneven number, if I have psukim that account for 2 an even number, and then I have another source, another pasuk that says your number must be uneven, that itself will force me to add a third judge. Hence, I don't need to use the pasuk of the Nikrav Bal Habayis for number purposes. Let us now turn to the Gemara. Shloisha Minola, from where do I know 3? The Tana Rabbanan, we now see a Tanaic source. How do we identify this as a Tanaic source? We see it has a frame around it. And in our marking addition, we note all Tanaic sources with frames around them to set them apart from the rest of the Gemara literature. The Tana Rabbanan, V'nikrav Bal Habayis El Hu Elohim Harei Kan Echad. We've dashed underline the word Hu Elohim, as this is the central theme of our discussion. So that accounts for 1. Ad Hu Elohim Yavo Devar Shneim Harei Kan Shnayim Asher Yarshiun Elohim Harei Kan Shloisha Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. So we see we've numbered them off 3 and dashed underline them 3 times the word Elohim, which indicates judges. Hence you need 3 judges. Rav Yehonasan Omer Rishon Tchilo Ne'amar. The first pasuk V'nikrav Bal Habayis El Hu Elohim serves as the opening of this section. Ve'ein dorshan tchilos. We don't darshan, we don't use opening psukim for drushes concerning numbers. Rather, we need it for itself, to teach the topic itself, namely that you need to have experts. Elo ad hu Elohim yavo dvar shneim harei kan echad. So Rav Yehonasan's first pasuk for numbers is the beginning of pasuk Ches. Asher Yarshin Elohim Harei Kan Shnayim. That being the latter part of pasuk Ches gives me the second judge. V'ein bezdin shakul. And you cannot have an even number, a balanced number of dayonim, of judges. Therefore, moisifen alein oid echad, we add another one, harei kan shlosha, giving me a total of 3. We can see from this source that Rav Yoshia and Rav Yehonasan agree that you have to have 3, but they're not in full agreement, otherwise they wouldn't be taught together in the same source. So what's their point of difference? Neima bedorshin tchilos komiflagi. Maybe we can suggest that they argue as to the issue of darshaning, of using an opening pasuk for the purpose of numbers. Demar savar darshan tchilos. According to Rabbi Yoshia, he would say we can darshan tchilos, we can use the first pasuk, the opening pasuk, for number purposes. Umar savar ein darshan tchilos, and Rabbi Yehonasan would say that you cannot. Maybe that's their point of controversy. The Gemara says, Loi, that's not their point of controversy. The Kulei Alma Ein Dorshan Tchilos. Rabbi Yoshia will agree that in general we don't use opening psukim for the purpose of darshaning, of coming to conclusions regarding numbers. Omar Loch Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia explains himself why in this case did he use the opening pasuk for this purpose. In Cain, if this pasuk was not for number purposes, Neima Krov V'nikrav Bal Habayis El HaShofet. The pasuk could have used the another term, maybe a more standard term, that the case is brought to the shofet, the judge. My El Holohim. Why did the Pasuk use the unusual expression of El Hoelohim? Shma mino leminyana. By the choice of the words El Hoelohim, the Torah was saying, I want you to use this as one of the numbers in order to get to 3. Rav Yehonasan, who disagrees, says, Lishna di alma nokat. The choice of the word Elohim is not to serve as a sign to darshan it, but rather it used a general expression, Kida'amri Idenshi, as people speak. Man de'is le dina, someone who has a case, likrav legabi dayina, should come to bring his case to a dayina, to a person who's a regular, who is knowledgeable and not a commoner. Hence, the Torah is using common form of speech, that when a person has a case, he wants his case to be brought in front of someone who is expert, not a common individual. But there is nothing more to be seen in this pasuk, according to Rav Yehonasan, with regards to numbers. As we go on in the Gemara, we take note of the appearance of a geometric form. This is explained in our margin. We call this the volcano form, and we're going to title this, our heading here is a Nosay, Hemshech, and a continuation of our discussion, because we're not turning to a new discussion over here. Continuation of the discussion that we opened up with Rav Yoshia, and Mivneh, a structural note combined here in our heading. We notice this volcano form, we call it Ma'akav. Ma'akav is an attempt to keep track of a discussion where there's a back and forth, where there's a give and take in the discussion. We like to follow where are we holding at any given point in the discussion. So here we have this form which has a narrow top and a wider bottom. So when the narrow top is in fact on top, these are she'elois birur shitas Rav Yoshia. These are questions designed to clarify Rav Yoshia's opinion. Me'achar detzorech posuk gam l'dayan shlishi. We see that Rav Yoshia requires a posuk for the third judge. Mashma de b'derech klal les lei beis din noteh. It seems that he doesn't hold in general from the idea of having a beis din noteh. Beis din noteh means klomar degam beis din shel mispar zugi shel dayanim kosher. If he does not hold from beis din noteh means an uneven number. It seems then, if he doesn't hold that you should have an uneven number, it sounds that in general an even number of judges would be okay. And we ask, hayitochein, is that so? So the question in simpler terms is, could it be so that Rabbi Yoshia could entertain the idea of having an even number of judges? And only in this case, the issue of 3, it's only because we have psukim that say to have 3, but otherwise on my own, I would have been able to tolerate the idea of having an even number. Could that be? When the form flips over, we entitle this tshuvos, responses. So as you glance down the Gemara from this point to the end of the narrow lines, and in fact we're going to even spill over to the first of the widest lines, these forms will be appearing, flipping back and forth each time. Question, answer, question, answer. The Gemara opens with a question. If this question itself lasts several lines, as is indicated by our long question marking to the immediate right-hand side of the Gemara text. Rabbi Yoshia les lei beis din noteh. Rabbi Yoshia, who needed psukim to get to the number 3, does he not hold that a beis din should basically be an uneven number? The Hatanya. We have the following Tanaic source. Rabbi Eliezer ben Osh Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer. Ma Talmud Lomar. What is meant by the pasuk that says Lintois Acharei Rabim Lahatois? The pasuk opens up by saying Velo Sane Al Riv Lintois Acharei Rabim Lahatois. HaTorah Omra Asei Lucha Beis Din Noteh. Without getting into literal translation of the psukim, which is certainly not the context of our shiurim, that For literal translations, we recommend using the fine Torah translations that are available on the market. However, what we derive from this pasuk, and we've dashed underlined the word lintos, that the Torah says, make for yourselves, establish courts that are noteh, that are uneven in number. That being the case, even if I didn't have a reference in the psukim to the number 3, I knew that I would have to have 3. The Gemara answers, sovar law. Notice how the form flipped over with the narrow part on the bottom. As we indicated in our introduction, this is an answer. Rav Yoshia holds, sovar law Rav Yehuda, the Amar Shivim. Rav Yoshia holds, like we saw Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah, that says that a Sanhedrin it has to be 70. 70 is an even number, Disnan. And we have a Tanaic source here, our Mishnah, Sanhedrin Gedola Hoysa Shel Shivim Ve'echad, Rav Yehuda Omer Shivim. Even though the Chachamim, the first opinion, said 71, but we've noted with our markings and emphasized Rabbi Yehuda says 70. And Rabbi Yoshia will buy into that. The Gemara asks a question. Notice, again, a long question. Eimar deshamis leilu Rabbi Yehuda b'Sanhedrin Gedola d'ksivi kroi. It may be said that Rabbi Yehuda holds that an even number is acceptable. That's when you're dealing with the Sanhedrin Gedola. And the reason that we'll accept an even number, or as we know as a bezdin shokul, that's because we have psukim that say so. We have a pasuk that says, is for l'shivim zekenim. B'shar beidina mi shamislei, but in the context of other courts, the lesser number courts, who says that Rabbi Yehuda would tolerate an even number. V'chitema lo ishna, and if you say that, well, Rabbi Yehuda makes no distinction, and all of them can be even numbers, v'hatanan, but we see to the contrary, in another Tanaic source. We saw this as well in our Mishnah, and it's in a frame here. Smichas zekenim, v'arifas eglo b'shloisha diver Rabbi Shimon. The ceremonies of placing the hands on the par helodova shel known as smichas zekenim, or the arifas eglo, the ceremony involving the finding of the murdered individual between two towns that we discussed in the previous shiur. That's done by 3, according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chamisha, and we've emphasized Rabbi Yehuda's name because he's the focus of our discussion. He says you need 5. V'amrinon, and we have to keep reading. Hence, we have this connector marking after the source, reading into the Gemara, and we say, "My time of Rabbi Yehuda." What's the basis of Rabbi Yehuda to get to 5? And the answer to that is v'samchu shnayim. The pasuk uses the word v'samchu, the placing of their hands. That's 2. Ziknei shnayim. Another 2. These are 2 words that are in plural form. So we have 2 plus 2. That's 4. The aim bezdin shakul. Notice how we've underlined this in it, as well as Rabbi Yehuda's name. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you cannot have a bezdin shakul, an even number of judges. Mosifan aleim eod echad harei kan chamisha. We add another 1 to the 4, getting 5. That's the end of our long question. But what's the essence of this question? To try to tie Rabbi Yoshia into Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yoshia, who we got the impression says that you can have an even number of judges, if not for the fact that the Torah required 3, and try to tie him or base Rabbi Yoshia on Rabbi Yehuda, who in general allows for an even number. That's not so. Rabbi Yehuda does not allow for an even number. Maybe in the Sanhedrin Gedola he does, but not in general. The Gemara answers, and notice we have a long answer marking here as well. The Rabbi Yoshia adifa mid Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yoshia goes further than Rabbi Yehuda. The ilu Rabbi Yehuda of Sanhedrin Gedola, who the less lay. Rabbi Yehuda himself will say that in a Sanhedrin Gedola, you don't have to have a bezdin nota. You don't have to have an uneven number. Ha b'shar beidina islay. But with regard to other courts, you do have to have a bezdin nota, an uneven number. For Rabbi Yoshia, as we said, he goes further than Rabbi Yehuda, says b'shar beidina nami leslay. Not only in the Sanhedrin Gedola, but with regard to other courts as well, he also holds leslay, that there is no need for a bezdin nota. There is no need for an uneven number. Hence, according to Rabbi Yoshia, you could have an even number. Therefore, in order to get to 3, which is an uneven number for Dinei Mominus, Rabbi Yoshia will get to that number only if it is sanctioned by psukim, by verses. We have a question, though. The issue of an uneven number, we saw, was itself sanctioned by the Torah. let us take advantage of another marking that we have here. We see a little arrow in the space between the Gemara and the Tosfos to the immediate right-hand side of the Gemara text. Try to find a corresponding arrow, and if you skim up the page, you'll notice, in fact, another arrow pointing to the line where we saw the word lintois dashed underline. That was used as a source for saying that you have to have an uneven number. Based on everything we're saying now, according to Rabbi Yoshia, you could have an even number. So the Gemara asks, V'elohai lintois mai ovidle. What does Rabbi Yoshia do with this pasuk that we thought meant, or the opinion expressed above said, means uneven? Answer, notice how the shape has flipped around again. Moikim lo bedine nefashos. He says that I need to have this teaching, this pasuk, in the context of capital cases, to tell me the following, that the vindication of the defendant is accomplished by a majority of one. The Rashi, about halfway down the page, says, Bedine nefashos shetiskayim bo hatayoscha letoiva al pi echad. That in capital cases, the exoneration of the defendant is accomplished by a majority of one. Kida amra b'masnisin, as we saw in the Mishnah. V'i havu zugois, and if you had an even number, leko hatoya b'pochos mishnayim, you wouldn't have a decision made with less than a majority of two. Continuing in the Gemara. Avol b'dinei momenis lo. So we're saying as follows, that in the case of capital cases, there you need to have an uneven number, because if you have an uneven number, let's take as an example 23, you can have 12 exonerating, 11 condemning. The 12 being a majority of 1 exonerates. 12 and 11, 23. But in Dine Mominus, there is no requirement of having an uneven number. The Gemara now asks, well, we have a source here, and we're going to suggest after the source that maybe this is not like Rabbi Yoshia. Before we go on in the Gemara, the source will tell us that if you have two judges in a case of mominus ruling one way, and the individual, the third judge, ruling another way, we will follow the majority. According to the Gemara's Havamina, this idea of following a majority opinion sounds like something Rabbi Yoshia would not agree with. The reason for that is, according to Rabbi Yoshia, that the number 3 is a Torah-based number. It would stand to reason, since the Torah requires 3 judges, the Torah would also expect them to be of the same opinion, of like mind. Hence, according to Rabbi Yoshia, who requires 3 based on the Torah, you couldn't have a situation of a difference of opinions. Even though you would have a majority, that wouldn't be enough. You'd have to have unanimity. Let us see this asked in the Gemara. Elo ha desnan. The following source: Shnaim omrim zakai v'echad omer chayav. If 2 would rule innocent and 1 rules guilty, since you have a majority ruling innocent, zakai, the person is exonerated. Shnaim omrim chayav v'echad omer zakai. If 2 rule guilty and 1 rules innocent, chayav, he is guilty, because we follow the majority. Neimo delok Rabbi Yoshia. Should we suggest that this Tanaic source would not conform to Rabbi Yoshia? Rabbi Yoshia, who required 3 based on psukim, would also require unanimity. The Gemara says that's not so. It's true that he requires 3 to be present in the case, in judging the case. However, the idea of having the majority serve as the conclusion, even Rabbi Yoshia would agree with that. Afilu temo Rabbi Yoshia. The concept of following the rove is something that even Rabbi Yoshia would agree with. Maisi law b'kal v'chomer medine nefashos. He derives that a majority opinion is sufficient in financial matters. He concludes that based on kal v'chomer logic from capital cases. What's the kal v'chomer logic? It's as follows: Uma dine nefashos dechamiri. Mind you, capital cases that's of great severity, a person's life is at stake. Omar Rachmana Zil Basaruba. The Torah itself says, follow the majority, and you do not have to have unanimity. Dine Mominus, financial matters, which is considered less severe than capital cases, lo kol shekain, certainly it's sufficient if you have a majority opinion and no need for unanimity. Hence, even though, according to Rabbi Yoshia, 3 is sanctioned by the Torah, that does not mean that you need to have unanimity. It's sufficient if you have 2 versus 1, and you would follow the majority. Before we go on in the Gemara, let us note our topic heading in the outside margin. We have a Nosay Mivneh, Shitas Rebbe. We're going to be exposed to the Shita of Rav Yehuda Nosay that says Dine Mominus B'chamisha, that for matters of Mammon, 5 judges are necessary. And then we're going to see a diamond featured. These are Shnei Shlovim, my time of the Rebbe. These are like 2 stages in trying to figure out what is the basis for Rebbe's opinion. Tana Rabbanan, we have a source that begins Dine Mominus B'shlosha, Rebbe Omer B'chamisha. The first opinion we've seen before, that Dine Mominus is judged by 3 judges. Rebbe holds 5. We will skip the brackets momentarily. Mivneh Shigmar Din B'shlosha. The reason that Rebbe requires 5 is because the conclusion of the case must be done by 3. That there must be 3 judges holding a particular opinion at the conclusion. Hence, we have to open up the case with 5. The skipped section was skipped because the material mentioned in the bracketed section is felt by the Gemara to be inaccurate, and it's corrected and in the context of these brackets, and then the final reading is what we saw outside of the brackets. So let's go over this again, anticipating, of course, something that's not going to be clear. Rebbe Omer, we're in the middle of the line. Rebbe says b'chamisha, that you need 5 for Dine Mominus, kedei shigomer hadin b'shlosha, so that you will have a majority, so that you'll have 3, which will be the majority, and I will follow the 3, which is a majority. So the Gemara asks, Otu b'tlosa, and if you were to have a case of 3, if you would have the case judged by 3, could I still not have a majority within that number? Milo gomar dino betray. Could I not have a gemar din with 2 ruling one way and the third being the minority opinion? So within 3, I can also produce a majority. Hachi komar. Rather, this is what Rebbe wants you to understand. Mipnei shigmar din b'shlosha, because a conclusion cannot be less than 3. So what number would you have to open up with in order to have a conclusion representing a majority number that is 3? The opening number, therefore, would be 5. Alma kosavar tlosa kiksivi. So we see from here, according to Rebbe, the 3 that are written, that are referred to in the Torah, when the Torah makes reference to 3 judges, bigmar dino ksivi. That represents the point in the case at which the case is concluded. This raises a question on the part of Rabbi Avo. Notice we have a long question marking to the immediate left-hand side of the Gemara. You notice a kuf that's encircled with a vertical dash line, indicating all of these lines are part of the question. And that will bring us to stage 2 in understanding Rebbe. Megadef bo Rabbi Avo. Megadef is a very strong expression indicating his dissatisfaction with what he just heard. So Rabbi Avo asks, Elo me'ata, if it be so that the posuk, that the psukim that refer to numbers are psukim referring to the number required for the gemar din, the determining opinion at the end of the case, Tehei Sanhedrin Gedola Tzricha Mea V'Arboim V'Echad. Sanhedrin Gedola, which the Torah says 71, we saw 70 plus Moshe, hence the Torah requires 71. You would then have to require 141 judges to sit on the Sanhedrin, Kadeshi Gomer Hadin B'Shivim V'Echad, so that the conclusion would be 71, which the Torah says, so that you would have a rove of 71 versus the minority of 70. How many would you need at the opening then? 141. Utehei Sanhedrin Ktana Tzricha Arboim V'Chamisha. The Sanhedrin Ktana, which we saw from the Psukim, we got to 23. we saw 2 times Ada plus the idea of having an uneven Beis Din and an allowance for a majority of 2, getting me up to 23. Arboim v'chamishi would require to have 45 judges sitting on the Sanhedrin Ketana Kadeshi Gomer Hadin b'shloisha ve'esrim, so that you would have a conclusion of a concluding number, a majority of judges, the majority being 23, which would be the Rov versus 22, 23 versus 22, which would be a total of 45. Elo. And we know that's not the case. We know that a Sanhedrin doesn't have 141, and we know that a Sanhedrin Ketana doesn't have 45. Elo isfali shivim ish amar achmona. When the Torah says, "Gather for me 70 men," mishas asifa shivim. From the initial point of gathering them together, it's 70. V'shaftu edo v'yitzilu edo nami, and the pasuk that indicates the number of judges for a Sanhedrin Ketana as well. Mishas shvitas ha'eda, from the beginning of the judgment of the Eda, of the group. So those psukim we see clearly refer to the beginning of the case and not a reference to the Gemar din. Hachinami, so too in the context of the 3, or of the simple cases, simply Dinei Momenis, V'nikrav Baal Habayas El Elohim, Mishas Kreva Shlosha, from the point the case is brought forth, you need to have 3, and not for the Gemar din, if that be the case. So how does Rebbe come on to 5? So we see again a diamond indicating stage 2 in trying to figure out Shitas Rebbe. Elohainu Taimot Rebbe. Rather, Rebbe's reason is based on the following: Asher Yarshiun Elohim Trey. The word Yarshiun is a plural expression, referring to a minimum of plural is 2. So we see the pasuk says Asher Yarshiun Elohim, which equals Trey. Ne'emar Elohim Lamata. It says toward the end of the pasuk Asher Yarshiun Elohim, V'ne'emar Elohim Lamala. And the earlier part of the pasuk said Elohim as well. Ma Lamata Shnayim, just like the end of the pasuk means 2. The pasuk said Yarshiun, which we said was the plural, meant minimum plural of 2. Af Lamala Shnayim. So too in the earlier part of the pasuk, where it said Ad Elohim Yavo Devar Shneim, it also means 2. So that's 2 plus 2 is 4. Ve'ein Beis Din Shakel, and you cannot have an even number of judges on a Beis Din. Mosifan Aleim Od Echad, we add one more. Hare Kan Chamisha. That gives me a total of 5. With that we explain Shitas Rebbe. V'Rabbanan, at the top of Daf Daled Amud Aleph we see the Rabbanan, they hold only 3. Yarshion Ksiv. They don't look at the way we read the word. They look at the way the word appears in the tradition, in the way it's spelled. And it's spelled without a vav toward the end of the word. And if you look at the spelling in and of itself and don't pay heed to the way it's read, it in fact is a singular expression. And as such, we don't get started with a drasha of 2 plus 2, but rather 1 plus 1, and ein bez and shakel, 1 plus 1 is 2, an even number, and you can't have an even number, you have to add 1, getting to 3.
This was a presentation of the Daf Map. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to be informed of our other videos. For resources and more information, please visit our website at www.thedafmap.com.